So this month we've got a few tasks to do. We're going to start with seam sealing all the joins on the underbody. Then we're going to pick a colour finally, and we're going to use that colour and mix it with an underbody coating and a boot interior coating, which I've decided to use a material called Raptor coating. So two-part epoxy. So you splatter it onto the bottom of the car, and it gives a very textured but incredibly tough finish. We're also going to do a bit more work on the fuse box and preparation for the wiring, which we'll do while other things are going on. I've also decided that I don't like how the dashboard's coming up. The material seems a bit soft, it scratches too easily, so I'm going to pull everything out and have another crack at that. So here we are doing a bit of seam sealing. I've been using a brush-on seam sealer, which once it's Raptor coated over the top of this, you won't see it. I've also done a bit of taping and masking so that we don't put the underbody spray all over the rest of the car. But you can see here that we've got most of the major joins well and truly seam sealed. And we've got plastic over all the bits that we don't want to go and splatter all over. You don't get a lot of control with a splatter gun, and it tends to put it everywhere. So you really do have to tape up everything that you don't want to actually paint. Anyway, so picking a colour is always the hard part, and you need to do that before we do the body colouring. So we've picked a nice grey colour, which you can see here in this. This is sort of similar to what we're trying to do. And we're going to complement that with a nice red interior, which really offsets it. It should look really smart. It's quite a stylish looking colour. Anyway, we applied that to the undercoating and got on with the job. And the first coats were not as dark as we had hoped. They came up well in terms of coverage and texture, which you can see here, but it's a shade lighter than what I was really hoping for. Anyway, so we needed to put on a second coat, so we got it retinted. And you can see here the texture is looking really good, but the second coat, here's this slightly darker grey. You don't get the full effect without the shine, but we think this is pretty close to the colour we're actually hoping to get. But I'm happy with how this has come up. The texture looks good. We've got good coverage. The whole body and the boot has now been done with this. So the bottom of the car is pretty much done. Also been having another look at the dashboard, and while it's come up pretty well with the rattle can wrinkle finish that we were hoping to look at, and it actually looks really nice. But what I found while putting the switches and things in is really not very durable. A bit of a fingernail here or there, and you'll get a scratch mark on it, which then shows up quite pronounced. And I'm not happy with that. It's not durable enough, and in a year it'll look quite tacky. Anyway, so I've decided to rebuild that. So I've pulled all the dash instruments out again, and I'm going to have a look at seeing if we can't powder coat it in a wrinkle finish. That'll be a much hardier finish and should be more durable. The second thing I was looking at is, you see this blanking panel here that says MG. It's a very nice looking panel. That's where it had the original radio fitted, which I'm not going to bother fitting. What I am going to do is put 2 more gauges in there. I know some people probably regard that as heresy, but like having trouble getting a half decent split gauge. The original oil and temperature gauge was a split one with the top and a bottom half. And they want exorbitant figures for a second-hand one, and then it's got a capillary feed to it, and it's horrible. So I've decided that I'm going to be a heretic, and I'm going to put in separate gauges, and I will use some nice digital gauges that look pretty much period, and I'm going to try and mount them into a panel which I'm going to put in that radio spot. So here's a bit of a mock-up of what I'm attempting to do. The gauges are not in their right position, but we're sort of just fitting them to show what it might look like. And I'm pretty happy with how they mount in there, I think. And once it's powder coated and painted the same colour as the dashboard, I think it'll be quite a neat installation and should actually still look the part. On the plus side, we should have some nice digital gauges that are very accurate and don't bounce all over the place like the old ones used to do. And things like the temperature and fuel gauges, as digital gauges, they can actually be accurately calibrated to give you the correct readings. So when I say digital, it doesn't not a digital readout. You still have a needle and a gauge, but they're digitally internally. There's a bit more work to do on the dash as well. Things like the indicators and the blinker indicator lights. The lenses in those are gone, so I've got to get some perspex and fabricate some new lenses that go in behind the dash, but none of that's too hard. The last remaining task with the dash is I'm going to try and do all the wiring for the dash, and I'm going to try and fix it on the back of the dash. The underside of the dash, from an electrical point of view, is normally a complete disaster. Um, I don't see any reason why, with the right wiring and a good layout, I can't actually put that wiring harness on the back of the dashboard and have a single plug or something on the end of it that allows you to flip the dash down and unplug the whole thing. I don't think that should be too hard. We'll see. So in the middle of this, we had a few delays and things. So I took the old project bike. That was my last major project, which is an old BSA 650 in 1953, 650 Gold Flash. Anyway, we took her up to the Adelaide Hills and had a bit of a blast. Bit off topic, but hey, it's fun. Also, a few other minor fiddly jobs. Did some plating on these are the window winder mechanisms, um, and the window slides. So they look much nicer than they did when we first pulled them out. They were very rusty. I have toyed with the idea of putting in electric windows into this, but I haven't made up my mind whether I'm really that silly yet. In the background, where I don't feel like blocking and sanding for all the rest of my life, I've been preparing wiring diagrams. So I've done a whole new wiring diagram, done it up in Visio, tried to keep all the international or the British standard wiring colour schemes to stand, and put in orders for all the wire that I'm going to need. This is modern wire. It's a little bit thinner, but higher amperage than the old stuff that they used in the early days. So it should give me some nice, tidy looms. I'm aiming to try and, make it a lot neater and tidier than the original looming was, and probably use waterproof connectors instead of bullet connectors and things in lots of places. So the wiring is sort of in prep stage. So this week it's back to body panel work. Um, these dogleg panels have given me a bit of grief because it's probably the biggest seam weld in the middle of the panel that I had to do, and getting them perfectly flat is pretty hard. The rest of the body also had a significant number of rust pits and things in it that end up needing to be filled, and quite a lot of little dents all over the place, and high spots that had to be tapped down and filled and things. So that's taken quite a long time. I'm getting there. I'm pretty pleased with how it's coming up, but it's needing quite a lot of sort of detailed attention. So this, you can see as I'm panning around, you can see where I've had to do all the different sort of lots of work. Um, this is almost ready now. I'm just about to wheel it or put another coat of high build 2K primer on it. I'm not going to do that on the inside because that all ends up being carpeted. That's ready to be painted before I carpet it. But the outer panels, I'm going to put another 3 or 4 coats of high build primer on, and then block and sand it back and try and get it nice and flat. The engine bay, I'm going to put another coat on that as well because I want these inner panels to look really nice when you look at the engine. But it's really slow work and it's hard work to get it right. It's quite an art form, so it's not as easy as it looks. But guide coat, block and sand, and just keep at it, and eventually it seems to be coming good. Um, So I spent some time taping it all up again, which is quite hard. Cover up all that nice underbody coating that I'd done. Wheeled her outside, and then put a couple more coats, or three coats of high build primer on it, which you can see here, um, and let that cure, and it's ready for its final uh, block and sand, or hopefully its final block and sand, and we'll see how those panels come up. If that's good enough, then she's almost ready to paint. Now, I think the remaining bits, I've got doors, bonnet, and boot that need to be attacked. Okay, so this week it's back to work on Bodywork, and as you can see, I've sprayed the actual chassis or the main shell with all the high build primer now, and I'm busy putting on some guide coat and getting down to really flattening and working that surface. So I have to work up through the different grits, getting it up to about 400 grit to get all the little scratches out of it, which looks like I'm getting there. A couple of close-up photos here of the primer that's nice and flat now, and and no scratches that you can see in it, so it's pretty much ready to be painted. I plan to put a sealer over the top of this before the base coat, but I won't do that until I've done the rest of the parts. So I've got most of the body down to the final sort of sanding, and now I've decided to start on the doors and the boot. So the doors I've sanded down. They're actually worse than I thought in that there's lots of little dents and things all over them. So they've taken a little while. I've sort of sanded them and done some initial filling with some pretty heavy duty filler. It's not deep, but it's sort of on the edges and things where it needs to be solid. Um, anyway, so I've done all that. The boot, obviously, you can see here, had lots of little areas that needed attention. So I've done that. That's come up really nicely. The doors are actually really hard to get right, but they're coming along. So I've done the initial work on that, and now I've hit them with a zinc phosphate primer that will bind to that all the bare metal and surfacing. Once the zinc phosphate is cured, I'll hit it with 4 or 5 coats of high build primer, and then we can block it back and see how flat I've managed to get it. So as the last bit for this month's video, had a few rainy days this week, so I have been finishing off the dashboard. So here's the mock-up of it with that little patch thing that went in the radio slot done with a couple of gauges mounted. And that's starting to look pretty good. I'm happy with that. Another really good find this week. I'm really pleased with this because I didn't have any seats for this car, and not even any frames. They were shot. I happened to be on the Fast book, and what should pop up is an ad for a couple of MGB GT seats, which are the orphan ones. They're the 69s with the headrests and things already attached. But they were really good. They were just not far away, about an hour up into the country. So we drove up and we picked them up, and they are really good, as you can see here, and got them for a very fair price. And, I think they'll go great. We'll have to get them recovered, obviously. We are still angling for the red interior, so I'm looking at getting the materials and things to get those underway fairly soon. So we'll go for red interior, red cards, red carpet, and I'll get these seats recovered in a matching red, I think. But that should give a nice pop to the external grey. Anyway, coming along. Look forward to seeing you next month.